Welcome to Philosophy 101, Morality and the Moral Life, Unit 3 in the curriculum, Part 2. We've been looking at moral theories, or that which makes something right or something good as opposed to wrong or evil. And we've looked at a variety of these theories. I'll go over those very quickly as a review. First, we looked at consequentialist theories, which focus on consequences or results of the actions we take based upon what we believe is right. Number one is utilitarianism. This viewpoint says the greatest good for the greatest number is what constitutes a moral position. And of course, we talked a little bit about the difficulty of determining what is the greatest good for the greatest number at times. And we also talked about how to know what the good is in the first place. How do we determine what is good essentially in terms of the nature of the thing itself? Second, we talked about ethical egoism, that which serves to further one's own self-interest, or that which is best for oneself. Now, in these two categories, under utilitarianism, we examined Jeremy Bentham and his pleasure or hedonist approach, and we examined John Stuart Mill and his pleasure hedonist approach, which was a little different because he talks about not simple pleasure or hedonism, but he talks about lower pleasures and higher pleasures, and that the higher pleasures are more refined and more, I guess you might say, more spiritual in nature, and therefore should override the lower, baser pleasures, which are more physical and animalistic. In ethical egoism, the serving of one's self-interest becomes a bit of a problem in itself, because the presumption that's made is that when we serve our self-interest, or that which we desire first, that somehow will translate into what is good for everyone else as well. The two approaches there are subjective relativism, which is individual, personal, wherein the individual decides what serves his interest personally, and that becomes the basis for saying what is moral and right. And of course, this limits the ability for anyone else to suggest or question the actions taken by an individual, because only the individual is in the position to say what is morally good and right for him. In addition, the collective approach to ethical egoism also is problematic, simply because it transfers the view of the individual to the view of the group. And of course, the question then becomes, why does the group have a monopoly on what is morally right? Why is it that we should accept that just because the group says that something is morally right, that in fact makes it so? Of course, groups can be wrong, they can be mistaken, they can also be corrupt. So that becomes a problem in and of itself. But either way you look at it, ethical egoism is about the idea that we decide as individuals or groups what is morally right, and that should settle the issue. Next, we looked at deontological, non-consequentialist theories, or God-command theory. This included an analysis of Immanuel Kant and the categorical imperative. It focuses on results and the intrinsic nature of goodness, but the results are not as important as the intrinsic nature of goodness in the first place. That conforming to the categorical imperative, which is the intrinsic goodness itself, settles the issue. And we are not responsible for all of the results that might flow out of that, because doing the categorical imperative is the good thing. And the categorical imperative flows directly from the essence and nature of God, the ultimate source of goodness, who is goodness itself and intrinsically good. So by following the categorical imperative, we find ourselves conforming to the image of God and submitting ourselves to His goodness as we live out our lives in relationship to others in the world. Third, virtue orientation theory. This focuses on the concept of goodness, but the emphasis is placed upon the things we as individuals do and the things that we are encouraged to believe and do by our significant social group. One part of orientation theory is virtue ethics, that which develops virtuous character. The idea being that as we conform and do those things which are considered virtuous things, we become more virtuous people. This also becomes a bit of a trap, though, because it starts to compel individuals to prove their virtue, which becomes what is known as virtue signaling, by conforming to politically correct ideas and politically correct behaviors, which may or may not be truly moral. The other part is ethics of care, that which emphasizes empathy and compassion in relation to others in specific situations. And again, this is all well and good. It's good to have empathy and compassion, but the danger is to begin to use our, quote, empathy and, quote, compassion to demonstrate and prove that we are morally good people. So the emphasis is no longer on being truly compassionate for others and serving them. It's on ourselves and our ability to show the world and show ourselves what great people we are. This doesn't mean that the acts we perform are not good for other people. They may be, but they may not be true compassion. They may be self-serving in some ways, which some would argue is not a sign of true virtue and goodness itself. So when we evaluate ethical theories and we look at things like scientific criteria of adequacy, we look at two areas: fruitfulness and conservatism. Fruitfulness focuses on logical predictions of outcomes based upon observable phenomena. This, of course, goes back to the idea of history and the history of behavior that results in certain outcomes, which can then be predicted if similar behavior is demonstrated again. Conservatism emphasizes consistency with known and established facts and experience. So it's more of a scientific cause and effect model. We know that if we do a certain thing, we're likely to get certain results or outcomes. And this becomes a way to measure the value and the impact of our moral position. Second, moral criteria of adequacy, that is, the consistency with considered moral judgments. Does our behavior, first of all, conform to what we claim to believe is true and right, and does that also play out in a larger social context to arrive at the agreed upon moral judgments of our culture? An example would be fidelity in marriage. Consistency between theory and relevant facts might be that faithfulness and positive relationships are the result of faithfulness in marriage, and this can be observed and then measured. Second, consistency between theory and the data it attempts to explain. For example, moral common sense. That is, do marriages last longer when there is faithfulness or fidelity in the marriage? Third, consistency with facts of moral life. Faithfulness and health and stability. That is, when there's fidelity and faithfulness in marriage, do those spouses in that marriage benefit from greater health and greater stability of all kinds? And fourth, resourcefulness and moral problem solving. Does fidelity and faithfulness in marriage diminish conflict between the two parties, and does it promote conflict resolution, whether there has been conflict between the two over some issue, or whether they face together conflict from an external cause or external source? And by using a model like that, you can determine some things about what the moral and right thing is based upon what you see as results in a variety of ways in that relationship. Now, let's look at moral relativism for a moment. Standards and origins of standards for moral relativism. Well, of course, the main contrast here is moral objectivism and moral absolutism as opposed to moral relativism. Moral objectivism means there's an objective standard for morality which may be objectively understood and experienced, and that this moral objective standard is also absolute. that as human beings, we're all wired up in similar fashion, regardless of our time, place, our culture, our race, our ethnicity, our religion, our gender. All of those things are factors that help us understand who we are. But in spite of all those things, we are very similarly made when it comes to understanding what is good and what is right. So, moral absolutism becomes the universal standard by which humans can begin to come to grips with what it means to be a moral person, a good person, and do the things that are right. In contrast to that position is moral relativism, which we've talked about before. Subjective relativism, in which the individual decides what's good and right, very subjective, dependent upon the individual's understanding of the world and the individual's preference for things, which can obviously be limited, well, they are limited, can be skewed or misinterpreted or misrepresented or even corrupted. Cultural relativism then is a collective, the group, attempting to accomplish the same thing as the individual, but as a group. Again, you can see the view of morality being limited, being fallible, being skewed, being corrupted. So these are problems. In subjective relativism, the problem is simply this. One must believe in the infallibility of the self, of the individual, concerning determining what's good and right. And second, the belief that sincerity equals truth. In other words, if I really am sincere and believe this is the right thing, it somehow becomes the right thing because I'm so sincere in my belief. And of course, these two areas, sincerity and infallibility, are limited and weak at best and can certainly be false. Cultural relativism, on the other hand, believes in the infallibility of the culture or the society or the group, the collective. It also believes that reform is illegitimate because if the group has established what is moral and right, there's no reason to reform it and change it. It is right. So there is no room for protest and for adjustment. The only room is for conformity. This raises up the idea of the myth of tolerance, which we talk about a lot, how we should be tolerant of the views of others and their behaviors and beliefs and practices. But in cultural relativism, this is not possible because the culture has established what the moral right thing is. And there is no logical reason to allow for dissent because the dissent, by definition, is immoral and wrong. So, as we look at moral relativism and subjective relativism, which involves the infallibility of the self and the infallibility of sincerity, there is an enchantment that seems to occur. It's almost a mystical kind of an idea. It's an enchantment with the notion of absolute autonomy, coming from the Greek words autos, meaning self, and nomos, meaning law. So literally, autonomy becomes a law unto oneself. Now, this doesn't mean that it's a law in the sense that, like we have traffic laws. What it means is we are the final arbiters of what is right, and no one can question. As individuals, we determine what is true, good, and right, and that settles it. It's absolute autonomy, okay? And absolute autonomy always leads, at some point, if everyone engages in it, at some point to chaos and anarchy, which becomes an even bigger problem. Cultural relativism, the infallibility of culture, and the illegitimacy of reform leads to the myth of tolerance, where we talk about being tolerant, but we don't act tolerant, and the myth of diversity, where we talk about accepting everyone's differences, but we demand conformity. And ultimately, the need or necessity of totalitarian control to put down dissent and to eliminate nonconformity. Now, the philosophical divide here comes between the imago Dei, the superlative view of humans as creating God's image, God being the superlative being of all beings. No image can go higher than that. If humans are created in the image of God, that's as high as you can go. Everything else is a downgrade. But the contrast of the Imago Dei with the Imago Hominis, which is the downgraded, degraded view, no matter how high-minded individuals are about the Imago Hominis, the image of man in man, or as Jean-Paul Sartre said, the creation of the image of man by man as he lives. So there is no essence of being, that is nature, image, prior to birth or prior to existence, but only after birth does the individual begin to become a person and begin to make decisions about who that person is. So it's humanity and humanity's image. But there are problems here, of course, because at what age does a human individual become sentient, cognizant, and capable of engaging in that kind of philosophical inquiry about oneself? So is a person not a person until they arrive at that point? And how do we determine when that point occurs? This has created many problems in terms of how we treat people, and especially the unborn, newborn infants, and even children up to certain ages, where at times in history, even without all of the modern science and the debate about medical procedures and so forth, there was a time when children were viewed as nothing really more than the property or possession of an adult. They were not viewed even as a human in their own right until later. The third approach is apotheosis hominis, which is a mystical leap of faith view. It means literally the transformation of man into a God. So humanity as God, and God then in humanity's image. Because there is no transcendent God, objective, external to humanity, to endow humanity with his image. Rather, humans create God in their own image and become gods themselves. Now, some would say this is all just symbolic, but I would tell you that we've arrived at a place where it's not just symbolic. Literally, there are discussions in high places, in intellectual contexts, about the possibility of this happening, that human beings could actually transcend to become gods themselves, whatever that might mean. I would also tell you, though, that this is nothing new. Every ancient culture on this planet that we have found evidence from has this idea. The ancient Egyptians had it with the Isis, Osiris, Horus myth, and the reenactment of that myth with every pharaoh, who was infused with the spirit of Horus, who was really the reincarnation of Osiris, and he became a god. The ancient cultures like in Mesopotamia, the Sumerian culture, or the Horite culture in southeast Turkey, where we find the oldest ritual ruins ever discovered on the planet. Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, huge ritual ruins that were designed to engage in rituals whereby humans came into direct contact with spiritual beings who they called the gods, and then the offspring of the gods, who were the demigods. You know these stories probably more directly from the Greek and Roman mythologies, where you have the demigods like Cyclopes, the Cyclops, or the story of Hercules, who were the offspring of gods and humans. This is in every ancient culture. In fact, it's even mentioned in the Bible, and it's mentioned in the extra-biblical text, like the Book of the Giants and the Book of First Enoch. And these were viewed as historical texts, not fanciful, made-up stories. So that's very old. But we have returned to this idea that we can somehow be transformed ourselves into higher beings. Now, one approach to that is that this can happen simply as a upgrading of humanity, where we retain our full humanness, but it is a quantum leap beyond what human means now. And the approach to that is both biological and technological. And there are many things being done along those lines as I speak here today. The other approach, though, is a more direct spiritual approach in which humans are invited to engage in ritual activities that open up portals or doorways into the higher planes of existence, whereby humans come into direct contact with spiritual entities who then become one with them and produce a new kind of human. Now, I know that sounds remarkable to many people, but it's really a very old idea. It's just that in our modern times, we are attempting to do the same thing with technology and biological manipulation or genetic manipulation. So it should come as no great surprise when you look back in ancient history and you see the same things going on with rituals back in that time. We've just glossed over the sort of occultic spiritual nature of those rituals and what they attempt to accomplish by painting over it with the modern language and the modern notions of science and technology. But those ancient cultures also had science and technology, and we're discovering more and more of that as we go forward. So maybe they were not as ignorant and primitive as we would like to think. So anyway, this has led us to, in our modern, postmodern era, to a new era that has become identified as transhumanism and posthumanism. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Posthumanism means after being human, what comes next? And it's a new kind of being that is not merely human as we think of it. Transhuman comes from the word trans in the Latin, which means to break a barrier or to cross over a barrier that should not be crossed. Literally is how that was used. So transhumanism is to cross over a barrier from human to something else that probably shouldn't be crossed, but we have decided to cross it anyway. The language for the transhuman, posthuman, is language like Homo noeticus, or the Übermensch, or the Aryan. All terms used by Friedrich Nietzsche, who was the great proponent of the modern view of man becoming something more than man, of transcending himself and becoming the Superman. In fact, Übermensch means Superman. So the Aryan goes back to the Tibetan mysticism, in which the Aryan race supposedly were like gods themselves who came down and cohabited with humans, and in order to raise humanity to a higher level of being. These are the beings that Adolf Hitler sent his SS to find in the Himalaya Mountains. A lot of people don't know that, but he did. He sent his followers there to try to find out who these entities were and how to make contact with them. The Homo noeticus simply means the new man. The new man. Not the man that we are now, but a new man. So, the use of genetic manipulation and programming is one of the main approaches in our modern era to try to accomplish this shift. One approach in genetic manipulation is DNA manipulation, attempting to splice genes from one species into another to create a hybrid form that is both and neither, but something new. And this DNA manipulation is designed to fundamentally change what it means to be human. So if this were done to you, you would cease to be you as you know it. You would become something else. Now, that may not matter to you, or it may not matter to a lot of people, but it should be something to be thought about and taken seriously if it fundamentally changes who and what you are. The result of this is a chimeric hybridization. In ancient writings like the Bible, the Book of Enoch, the Epic of Gilgamesh, or writings like the sacred writings of Egypt, the sacred writings of Babylon, the writings of the Greeks and the Romans about these issues, all read very much the same. And they talk about a chimeric hybridization that occurred through sexual relations that occurred between these higher beings and human beings that resulted in offspring that were very different from normal humans. Now, they viewed it as transcendent beings that were better and superior to humans. On the other hand, the tradition of the Bible, Book of Enoch, Book of the Giants, those writings, they were viewed as not superior, but as very dangerous and inferior because they had lost the very essence of their highest being, the image of God. And as such, they had deformed or perverted into something lesser. Not lesser in the sense that they were less strong or maybe less intelligent, but lesser in the sense that they were morally and genetically corrupt, and therefore very dangerous and very violent. And this is what's depicted in all of these stories, the battles, the wars, the violence that occurred when these beings began to operate in the realm of humanity. The second way that this is attempting to be accomplished is technological enhancement. And here we have the myth of AI, artificial intelligence, and the ghost in the machine. The belief that somehow technology can become living and sentient and conscious in and of itself. There's no evidence whatsoever that this could ever happen. There's no evidence that it ever has, although there is a question about whether spiritual forces of the type we're talking about might possibly be able to manipulate the technology and imitate consciousness, whereby the machine appears to be thinking on its own, but in fact it's being manipulated by an outside force, much like a hacker would hack into your computer and manipulate things that are beyond your control. Now, we know that can happen. That doesn't really disturb us from the standpoint of the possibility. It's interesting, though, that many people just sort of freak out at the idea there could be a spiritual realm where entities much more powerful than some hacker, I don't know, in Southwest Missouri, could actually manipulate matter and energy and technology. That really seems to disturb a lot of people. I'm not sure exactly why. Well, I think I know some reasons why, but it's also very plausible. If it's possible for us to do it, and if other kinds of beings that are transcendent exist with the knowledge capability, why they couldn't do it as well. So that's one approach we have to take seriously and start thinking about. And of course, right now in AI, one of the conversations is, can AI take over and become our masters and we become slaves? Well, we'll have to wait and see, but it's possible that what we think is simply technology ruling could be something greater than technology, ruling the technology and then ruling us. So it's important to think about. The second area in technological enhancement is implantation. And we're not talking here about the idea of prosthetics. We're not talking about an artificial hand or an artificial heart or heart valve. We're talking about true implantation where technology is infused into the biology of a human being to reprogram what that biology does. And that becomes a major shift in terms of what it means to be human. And the moral ethical questions about that are immense. The third area is biotech hybridization, the idea that somehow technology and genetics could be fused in such a way that a new being is the result. Think, if you will, for example, of superheroes like the X-Men, like Wolverine, for example. That this is a new kind of being that is not technological, not biological, but biotechnological as a new being. And this is more than implantation. This is actually a fusion whereby the technology and the biology become one and cannot be separated. And this is viewed as a really positive thing by those who are involved in some of this research. There are those involved in the research that are very cautious and issuing grave and grim cautions and warnings about what's being done. But it is being done. Third, scientism and the mystical occultism. Scientism is not a new thing. Scientism is the religion of science. It's the worship of science as a religion. It's not science itself, which is the observation and analysis of phenomena and then experimentation and hypothesis testing of those observations and phenomena to try to determine what makes the most sense about reality. Scientism, on the other hand, is the belief that science is greater than humanity and has answered all the questions, and everyone should simply bow down and submit to science. And of course, this involves also submitting to the high priesthood of science, which is the scientists who worship science as God and who then demand that everyone else agree with whatever they say, and they go forth unchallenged because they know more and are higher beings already than the rest of us. So, in that realm, you hear some really strange theories start to emerge about how science can somehow forge a connection with the supernatural or ethereal or metaphysical realm, and that the metaphysical realm can become fused and one with empirical science, and so that through science and technology we can engage the, quote, other, which is the metaphysical realm, and in a kind of a magical, mystical way, through scientific ritual manipulation, we can bring those entities into our world and even into ourselves in a supernatural way. And therefore, we become the controllers of those powerful supernatural forces, or even we become one with those beings that we would call gods. And that's a real area of research as well. So what does this all mean? This all means that we are at a crossroads about how we view ourselves, at how we view our world, at how we view the idea of God himself. And so, is man destined to become the Superman and a God himself, or not? Well, it all depends on how we see it and how we come to understand it. And of course, ultimately it depends on what is true and real. So, if there are fallen entities, which the Bible in Hebrew talks about as fallen angels, the B'nai Elohim, and they produce hybrids that in the Bible are called Nephilim, and their descendants, the Rephaim, what does this suggest concerning everything we're looking at in our modern world about contacting or becoming one with those kinds of supernatural forces, or transforming ourselves into those kinds of entities? Well, if they are malevolent entities, this could be a very dangerous thing. It could ultimately lead to the loss of the soul and the very self of what it means to be human. And one can only wonder what that would mean for humanity, to lose humanity. Second, there's the idea of the hive collective. If you remember the Borg group in the popular television series Star Trek: The Next Generation, the Borg was a collective where no one had individual identity, but all worked as part of a group in a kind of a hive context. And their goal was to assimilate everything they encountered, everyone they encountered, into the hive, so all individual identity was lost and everyone became an expression of the whole. Okay? That's a little bit like, by the way, in world religion, the approach of Hinduism and Buddhism to be released from the bondage of this world and life and experience moksha, which is, in their view, liberation into the monistic all, where the individual is lost forever in the vast soulishness of all of reality, in the divine all. So this is a westernized perspective on that same idea. It implies also that there's something fundamentally wrong that should be rejected about the individual self, that the individual self is inferior in some way. So that's another important idea to think about. But we see this happening also on a social, cultural level, whereby people are more and more being pressured to not think for themselves as individuals, but to conform to a particular group in what they think and believe. And if you don't do that, you suffer repercussions that are quite negative and consequential, and you tend to be rejected and ostracized and ultimately silenced for that. So we're living in a strange time where we talk about ourselves and the importance of our individuality, but then we live in contexts that want us to abandon and deny the significance of our very individuality in favor of conforming to some group that supposedly knows better than God or ourselves in relationship with a higher authority. So this leads to what I call weeding the garden. Weeding the garden. We are at a time now where, in order to make this quantum leap into higher consciousness and higher being, we have to be quote, upgraded according to the shakers and movers, the planners for transhumanism and posthumanism. This means that we have to identify who is fit and unfit. The fit being those who agree with the agenda, the unfit being those who ask questions and resist. And of course, in the Hive Collective, in the Borg on Star Trek Next Generation, the mantra was, resistance is futile. If you resist, you will be eliminated. So we have to identify the good versus the bad. And the basis for identifying who is a good moral person and who is not seems to be arbitrary and dependent solely upon who has the power to implement the policies that are desired to upgrade humanity into a demigod. Of course, to accomplish this requires a gradual approach to condition people to find it acceptable. Much like the frog placed in the pan of water where the water is slowly heated until it becomes a boil, and the frog doesn't notice the rising of the temperature until it's too late and then boils alive. The best way to accomplish this, the human planners have figured out, is to exert more and more control to the point of becoming totalitarian or absolute in control, whereby all power is invested into the elite. And you have force majeure. You have a force so powerful that it cannot be resisted. And it controls everything in life, and you either march according to that drumbeat or you are eliminated. So, will we arrive at the place where we all are simply drones working for the elites and for the machine, for technology? If so, will we arrive at the place that Richard Brautigan's poem talks about? His poem titled, All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. In his poem, Brautigan envisions a harmonious coexistence between nature and technology, presenting a utopian vision of the future. It depicts a world where computers and animals live in equilibrium, free from human interference. The author's optimistic tone and simple language convey, a sense of hope and possibility. Compared to the author's other works, the poem exhibits a shift towards a more technology-centric perspective. Brautigan's earlier works often explored themes of isolation and alienation, but here he embraces a vision of technological advancement that benefits humanity. In the historical context of the mid-20th century, the poem reflects the growing optimism surrounding technological progress. The post-war period saw advancements in computing and automation, which raised expectations for a better future. Brautigan's poem captures this sentiment, envisioning a world where technology serves as a catalyst for harmony between humans and the natural world. And I would say also promotes the notion that humans, by becoming fused with the natural and the supernatural realm, in which they transcend being merely a human, but become Nietzsche's vision of Homo noeticus, the Übermensch, the Aryan, become in their minds and hearts gods themselves, all watched over by machines of loving grace. I like to think, and the sooner the better, of a cybernetic meadow where mammals and computers live together in mutually programming harmony like pure water touching clear sky. I like to think, right now please, of a cybernetic forest filled with pines and electronics where deer stroll peacefully past computers as if they were flowers with spinning blossoms. I like to think, it has to be, of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature, returned to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of loving grace. Brautigan's poem captures dramatically the spiritual vision of many, many people and many people involved in biotechnology and biotech research concerning what they feel the perfect future would be like with only humans, machines, and nature, and no God. In contrast to this view, I would like to submit to you a different view, another poem. It comes from the Bible, the New Testament, and it might be titled, All Watched Over by God in His Loving Grace. And it goes like this. Our Father, who art in heaven, holy is your name. Your kingdom come, and your will be done, here on earth, just as it is in heaven. So give to us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive those who are indebted to us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Well, these two perspectives, I think, do an excellent job of framing for us as modern people the choice before us. Who and what are we? Why are we here? What will we become? And how should we then live our lives in relationship to all that is? Important questions, to say the least. Now, I would like to conclude this lecture with a couple of songs. The first is a song by a great singer-songwriter. In fact, his music has been on display in the Smithsonian Institute, and he has been identified as a national treasure in terms of songwriting, and his name is John Coburn Stewart. He was originally a member of the great folk group in the late 1950s through the mid-1960s called the Kingston Trio that had many well-known songs, very popular. You probably don't know much about these because they were way before your time. He went on to become a solo artist that wrote some very important music. One of the songs he wrote was called Armstrong, which was commissioned by the government, and it tells the story of the first moonwalk with Neil Armstrong. It's a very interesting song because it talks about what's going on here on Earth while Armstrong is walking on the moon. I would encourage you to look it up and give a listen to it. He also wrote a very famous song that the pop group The Monkees recorded back in the late 60s. Became one of the biggest songs of the year and a perennial popular song. And it was called Daydream Believer. Now, Jon Stewart's version is a little different than the Monkees, so if you want to get a contrast of how that song was performed by both, you might look them both up. It's very interesting to see the different take on the song. Jon Stewart was also a fantastic guitar player and banjo player, and he became friends with Lindsey Buckingham, who you might know of because he was the primary guitar player for the band Fleetwood Mac, and he is credited with developing the Fleetwood Mac sound. Really, however, Lindsey Buckingham has said that it was Jon Stewart who really created that sound. And you can hear that clearly if you listen to a few cuts from the album Bombs Away Dream Babies by Jon Stewart, in which Jon and Lindsey play guitar together on that album. And then if you listen to the Rumors album by Fleetwood Mac, you'll hear immediately the influence of Jon Stewart on the guitar work on that album. So I want to play a song of his that talks about what we've been talking about. It's called Bad Rats. And I'll play that for you here in a moment. The other song I want to share with you is a song that I wrote a number of years ago, actually as part of a novel I was working on, which I'm still trying to figure out what to do with. It's completed and it's all been formatted and looks great, but I'm trying to figure out how I want to publish it. It's a disturbing, very dark novel in a way, because it deals with a lot of the stuff that I've been talking to you about in terms of the hybridization of humanity. And it is a kind of a serial killer story as well, so it has suspense and murder in it. But anyway, it's called The Nothing Man, and I wrote this song as a piece to go along with that novel. The song is called, appropriately, Imago Dei. So I'll put those on here for you now so that you can listen to those as well as listen to this lecture. And we'll conclude with those two pieces. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Good rats all have wheels, good rats all have names, good rats all can feel, good rats are the same, good rats all have friends, good rats all can eat, and good rats all get papers to protect their little feet. Song about the good rats. Bad rats have no names, bad rats have disease, bad rats are the same, bad rats all must leave, bad rats have no friends, bad rats die alone. Let's all kill the bad rats and pass around the stone. Song about bad rats. Yes, song about the bad rats. Song about the bad rats.
There ain't no way no more telling who's a bad rat. Oh, there ain't no way no more telling who's a bad rat. There ain't no way that I know telling who's a bad rat. Ain't no way. There ain't no way I know. There ain't no way I know. Telling us about right. Ain't no way I know. Ain't no way I know. Ain't no way I know. Telling us about right. Telling us about right. Telling us about right.
Look at all them Asian people, glad they're not like me. Look at all them inner city people, glad they're not like me. Look at all them homeless people, glad they're not like me. A song about the bad rats.
It's so easy to psych or shame, change the focus or shift the blame, feed the fire and fan the flame, to sow the seed of dying. It's so easy to boast and bluff, talking trash while acting tough, pretending image is good enough, when all the time you're lying. When it comes to being true to the imago Dei, when it comes to me and you, we better learn to pray. In a world so devoid of grace, even love seems out of place. I see the sorrow written on your face. Is it too late for trying? When it comes to being true to the imago Dei, when it comes to me and you, we'd better learn to pray. When it comes to being true to the imago Dei, when it comes to me and you, we better learn from praying. There's nothing left to say. It's so easy to psych or shame, change the focus or shift the blame, feed the fire and fan the flame, sow the seed